It's been a pretty strange couple of weeks to be a PlayStation fan, hasn't it? I mean, since the launch of Concord and then the cancellation of Concord, the release of Astro Bot to the announcement of the PlayStation 5 Pro, it's kind of been all over the place messaging-wise. And truthfully, when Sony announced a PlayStation 5 and PSVR 2 State of Play, I was a little bit trepidatious. The previous ones have been solid enough, in my opinion, and in fact, I think the presentation generally has been getting better and better. But going into this show, all they seemed to have to offer, at least going off the leaks, was a high-profile remaster that we'll definitely get to. So I wasn't expecting much, and maybe that's why I've come away from this show really kind of blown away. I thought it was solid across the board with some pretty great high points. The best thing about it was that it kind of had everything. So grab a bucket of balls because we have much to discuss about what went down last night. Let's start with a biggie and paradoxically right at the end, because last night Sony announced a true successor to Ghost of Tsushima, and it wasn't the Ghost of Tsushima 2 that we were all probably expecting. Instead, this full sequel is a brand new story called Ghost of Yotei. In the Sony blog post following the trailer, it was confirmed that we will be jumping 300 years into the future following the end of Ghost of Tsushima, picking up with a brand new character called Atsu. We have a brand new setting with much of the trailer focusing on that gorgeous landscape and Mount Yotei in the background. We have this new character. We're set in the 1600s, and it's confirmed that this is the first Sucker Punch game built from the ground up for the PlayStation 5. Honestly, I was absolutely buzzing about this. I thought the trailer itself was a huge surprise. I'm so impressed that they managed to stop this from leaking before the showcase went live. And generally, we've just been waiting for a sequel to Ghost of Tsushima for a long time now. It was incredibly visually impressive from what we saw, furthering the elements that we all loved about Ghost of Tsushima, like the unique mechanics such as the reliance on wind, which sounds kind of crazy to say, but if you played the game, you'll know exactly what I mean. The tactility that brought to exploring the open world was much appreciated, especially at a time when most open world games were still relying on the player just going from random waypoint to random waypoint without really taking in and looking at the environment and the world that was created around them. Though the trailer itself only hinted at new details and mechanics and the new story focus, the blog post that I mentioned and a New York Times write-up that featured some interviews with team members and Herman Hulst, who is the wider co-CEO of PlayStation, did actually reveal some concrete information about the game. The New York Times article said, quote, "Without going into detail, the developers said Ghost of Yotei was a story of underdog vengeance that followed Atsu as she moved through the natural landscape, including sprawling grasslands and snowy tundras. They said players would have greater control over her story than in the previous game." Later on in the piece, they also mentioned that Atsu is going to have a wolf companion, which sounds absolutely sick, as well as a focus on firearms in her arsenal, with this game taking place so many years after the original. And honestly, all of those tidbits sound absolutely delicious if you ask me, especially that allusion to a greater focus over the control of the narrative. The original Ghost of Tsushima, if you remember, didn't have a whole load of narrative divergence, but there were some key points where the player did have to make a decision. What comes to mind, obviously, without spoiling, in case you haven't played it, is that final choice towards the end, which honestly took me by complete surprise. That was one of the most powerful parts of the game for me, and it was one of those moral decisions that I don't think, anyway, had a clear-cut good or bad outcome. I was racking my brains over what to do. I paused the game, I sort of paced around my flat for a little bit, came back, decided, kind of regretted it, and I think that's the best way to do moral choices in games. You want to feel a little bit conflicted no matter which way you go, and hopefully, with this quote in mind, that's what we get more of with Ghost of Yotei. If they're able to supplant that one moment across the rest of the game without sacrificing the quality of storytelling that we saw in the original game, I think that will really set this apart from the original. It's also just fascinating and a W, I think, to move the story on from Jin Sakai, a character that I absolutely did not expect to love as much as I did in the original game. He went to moral grey areas that I didn't expect a Sony first-party character to go go to and had great relationships with the supporting cast in that game. But when you take into account the ending of that game and the DLC, Jin's story does feel nice and complete. It is a meaty beginning, middle, and end that is dramatically satisfying. And honestly, this wiping the slate clean and starting with a new character in a new time period while keeping the ethos of the themes that made Ghost of Tsushima's story so impactful, I think will allow this game to really feel like a proper sequel. And what I mean by that is, for as much as I loved God of War Ragnarok or Horizon Forbidden West, gameplay-wise at the very least, maybe not so much story-wise for God of War Ragnarok, but gameplay-wise for both of those games, they both felt like minor iterations on what we had previously. They were good iterations, don't get me wrong, but I think it was more of the same in a way that is fine, but wasn't quite as revolutionary feeling as their original games felt, if you know what I mean. So, with having the freedom to kind of do whatever the hell they want with this sequel, you hope, and the proof will be in the pudding, that they get to push the boundaries of what this game franchise can be with this sequel. Also, it's interesting, before we move on, that in the New York Times report, that they referred to Ghost of Tsushima as one of their major franchises. In fact, they talked up the fact that the game is going to have spin-offs going forward, which is really interesting, as well as the already confirmed movie with John Wick director Chad Stahelski. Now, that spin-off comment is interesting, I think, and could, unless I'm reading way too much into it, it could mean that despite Jin's story kind of being finished, it won't be the last we see of him. Maybe he returns for a spin-off or a smaller game that maybe acts as an epilogue to the already kind of epilogue that he got with the DLC, but you know what I mean, maybe it's not the last we see of him. And the reason that I've talked the most about Ghost of Yotei so far, and I've taken up so much time with this video with it, is that, of course, it was by far the biggest showing of the entire state of play. In many people's eyes, it's kind of what saved the entire thing from being a bit meh. And that's cool. I didn't expect it. I didn't expect to see any first-party reveals on this scale. I thought they might have waited for the end of the year, maybe at the VGAs or something, but now we kind of have a much better understanding of what 2025 has got to offer. We've got this to look forward to. We have Death Stranding 2. We have, apparently, Marathon still to come, and we could still get Marvel's Wolverine, though that doesn't have a 2025 date locked in, I don't think. Anyway, moving on to slightly more controversial news, and that is the announcement of the Horizon Zero Dawn remaster, by far the worst kept secret in the gaming industry. Now, if you have listened to the What Culture Gaming podcast, you'll know that I was a bit nothingy on the idea of this happening. I wasn't in the camp that people are in where they absolutely hated the idea and thought it was a waste of resources, but at the same time, I didn't expect myself to be gushing over it or going out to immediately pre-order it and it being one of my most look forward to games of the year. All that said, though, I actually was really impressed with this showing. I didn't think they could really do anything to justify a remaster only 7 years after the original, because that original still plays incredibly well and looks gorgeous if you're playing it on a PlayStation 4 or a PlayStation 5 with the patches to this day. But when you see the two side by side, it's clear that a lot of work has been put into this remaster, and I think the price point is just right, coming in at $49.99 for new players or a $10 upgrade for anyone else who actually owns the original game. And I think for that $10 or even the $50, you actually are getting quite a substantial upgrade. They have confirmed in the blog post since that they are pretty much trying to get parity with Horizon Forbidden West, transferring that game's general aesthetic and art style over to the original to make them a more natural continuation if you're playing them back to back. Likewise, Aloy's character model has been transferred over too, in all of its high-fidelity glory. Perhaps most surprisingly, though, is that they confirmed that they have redone some of the dialogue from the original game and the mocap recording in general. I did not see this coming, and in my eyes, this actually kind of puts Horizon Zero Dawn Remastered somewhere in between something like The Last of Us Part 2 Remaster and The Last of Us Part 1, which was considered a total remake. I think the addition of that extra mocap and re-recording of the dialogue will give the wider world of Zero Dawn, which was still beautiful, that bit more dynamism. It'll allow it to have better animations and better delivery that matches the main cutscenes, which were always pretty excellent. So yeah, while I still probably won't be rushing out to play the game, I get it. You know, I understand why this is happening. Horizon is one of their biggest franchises, and it looks like they have done more than just the bare minimum with this remaster and put in a good, substantial amount of work. So I'd say it's a W. Next up in my notes, I've kind of collected up what I'm referring to as the focus on PlayStation classics, because alongside the Zero Dawn remaster, we also got an announcement of a remaster collection for the Legacy of Kain and 2 Luna games. Now, I think having both of these projects on the platform is an absolute win. Over the past 12 months, I really think Sony has seen the potential that the classics offering could offer players, diving into it with 2 feet finally and delivering some fan-favorite cult classics alongside the bona fide classics. And I think just everyone, but most specifically Scott Tailford, whose scream I can hear coming over the wind from his house on his day off somewhere, is absolutely buzzing to see Legacy of Kain back. That is one of those games that has been sought after for a long, long time and has that dedicated fan base, even if it might not be, a Spider-Man in terms of popularity. The same could be said about Dino Crisis, which popped me silly. I love that that is coming back, albeit not with an official remaster. That is just part of the PlayStation Classics collection coming at some point. That's another one a lot of fans have been crying out for, admittedly, to see the proper remake treatment, but at this point, I just like the fact that Capcom knows Dino Crisis is still a thing. Maybe if people play this game, it'll result in more games, or that remaster, or that proper remake, who knows, just I'm excited to play it. On top of this, we also got the announcement that The Last of Us Part 1 is coming to the PlayStation Plus collection in September, and this upcoming month's free games include Dead Space, the remake from last year, which is absolutely excellent, and WWE 2K24. Next, I want to talk a little bit about PSVR 2 because I did not expect anything for this platform in the state of play, and I've come away really impressed with what I did see. We already knew that the Metro VR game was coming later on this year, and we finally got a release date for that here, as it's coming now early in November. I think this thing looks absolutely awesome. I'm a big Metro fan anyway, and I think it's a perfect fit, its style of first-person horror, for a VR platform, and PSVR 2 does need more games, so with this, along with the Alien game that's coming this year, VR, admittedly, has had a lot of good games across the past 12 months. On top of this, we also got the announcement of Hitman World of Assassination coming to VR 2, and this was something I did not expect, but have been personally crying out for the past few years. The original Hitman on PSVR was the kind of clunky, ropey game that, isn't perfect, but it's just so much fun. The humor from Hitman and its many assassinations and many instances of goofiness, as well as the genuine action and genuinely great stealth gameplay, just make it so special and so perfect for that VR adaptation. I hope they can implement it well, and I look forward to messing around with the NPCs in that world later on this year. That was an unexpected but delicious surprise. We also got confirmation that the Midnight Walk, a game that was announced at the start of the State of Play, is also going to be PSVR 2 compatible, which, again, is really welcome. I want to see that happen more, and I will never stop being gutted and annoyed and frustrated that my beloved Astrobot is still not VR2 compatible, despite being one of the best games on PSVR, but that's a video for a different time. Next, we got a little bit on the PlayStation 5 Pro, which honestly was a little bit of a dud, in my opinion. I know I've ragged on the PS5 Pro's price point for a while now, but I just thought it was a bit redundant to see a sizzle reel mostly comprised of games that we saw running on a PS5 Pro just a few weeks ago. Yeah, we finally had an official look at Final Fantasy Rebirth, but I don't know, it just kind of seemed like it was there to remind you that it's a thing and that it's coming, but didn't really have a game that blew us away in the way that I think a lot of us are looking for to justify that price. Next, I've rounded up a bunch of announcements that were pretty much just DLC announcements for already existing games, or at least updates on DLC packs, and yeah, they were pretty good. My beloved Alan Wake 2 has always had the Lake House DLC announced for October, but we got the first proper trailer for it here, which showed off tantalizing its connections with Control. Now, if you don't know, the works of Control and Alan Wake are related, and while there has always been some crossover material to both, with some FBC, that's the Federal Bureau of Control, characters showing up more prominently in Alan Wake 2, this looks like the most extensive crossover we've got so far, with characters from Alan Wake going in to the FBC from Control, literally swapping locations and environments. We also saw an object of power right at the very end, again, another staple thing from Control. So this is tantalizing. I'm really interested to see how they pull this off, because honestly, I'm kind of not the biggest fan of crossovers. I love Control, I love Alan Wake, but I don't need them to be like MCU style interconnected. A few references here and there is cool, but they're both so distinct. I personally don't need it, but I trust Remedy enough that I'm absolutely going to be there day one to play this, and I will probably be convinced, because they always convince me on their ridiculous ideas. So I will probably be eating these words in a month or so. There was also the absolutely sensational announcement that the Nier Automata 2B costume is coming to Stellar Blade. That is a match made in heaven. We got a shadow drop for TMNT Shredder's Revenge with DLC coming out the day of the showcase. And of course, we kicked off the show finally getting a glimpse of Astro Bot's already announced time trial DLC, which looks really sweet. Astro Bot is a great game. Some of the more difficult platforming levels in that title are perfect for time trials and speedruns, and from the glimpse that we saw of those levels in this trailer, they definitely look like they're erring on the harder side, which is very cool. Then we got the announcement of Pal World for PlayStation, which I just thought, honestly, just leveling with you all here. I thought this was absolutely piss funny for this to be announced for PlayStation pretty much in the same week that Nintendo announced that they were literally suing the creators of Pal World for, I think it was patent copyright infringement. Who knows what the results of that will be, but obviously Pal World is a hugely successful game from earlier in this year and has amassed a dedicated fan base since it launched on PC and in early access on Xbox. And yeah, now you actually have that to look forward to if you don't own a PC or an Xbox. Finally, we got some announcements from third-party studios, including Hell Is Us. And absolutely, and I know that I've used this word a lot, so bear with me, but that was another tantalizing game. That was one of those games where the trailer starts, and at least for me, I started going, I sort of sat forward. It was that kind of meme, and I thought, what have you got here? Then that was sort of tempered with the realization when we cut to gameplay that it was another Souls-like game. Now, if you'll know me, you'll know that I am big on the Souls-like genre. That is kind of an understatement. I try to play as many of these games as possible, and up until right now, I haven't had that feeling that I've seen a lot of people online have, where they see a trailer for a new game, and it turns out to be a Souls-like title, and they kind of just go, another one. And this is sort of the first time I've had that. And don't get me wrong, I'm absolutely still looking forward to this game. I think its mix of horror and sci-fi looks fascinating, and the gameplay itself did look a bit more fast-paced than what I'm used to from some Souls-likes recently, with a few more enemies on screen than I was expecting. But I must admit, I even think that I maybe am getting to my threshold when it comes to games that play like this, because from a visual standpoint, I thought it looked so unique, and then from a gameplay standpoint, I kind of already know how it's going to play before I play it. But still very promising, still very cool to see, and I look forward to seeing more on that. And then we have the Midnight Walk, which I mentioned earlier, which is a PS5 game that's also compatible with PlayStation VR 2. Now, I thought this looked pretty cool. I love the idea, as confirmed in a blog post after the State of Play, that it's entirely focused around claymation models, and in fact, all of the character models, at least from what I gleaned from the blog post, are actually made in real life and then scanned into the game. I thought that was a neat addition. It looks gorgeous. It is definitely unique for a visual aesthetic in gaming right now, and I definitely champion that. I love the little fella with his little flame head It looks cool. It's not necessarily something that I would gravitate towards personally, but again, it was a good one to have at the showcase, even if it was smaller in scale than something like Ghost of Tsushima. There were a few other things that I can't get to here because Cy White will absolutely kill me if I keep rambling on and don't deliver this news video in time to get it up today, and that included the likes of seeing the release date for the new Monster Hunter, which is coming next February, another look at the Dynasty Warriors Origins game, and some new variants for the PS5, including 3 Chrome editions, which look pretty sick. My PlayStation is hidden under a cabinet, so I'll not make use of those, but it is good to have more customization when it comes to your consoles. So all told, I actually thought it was a pretty good conference. Maybe it's because my expectations were so low, but after the past few tumultuous weeks, this gave me everything I needed anyway to have confidence, at least in the next year of Sony. I would still absolutely love to see a proper PlayStation showcase and not just a state of play before the year is out, but I don't think I'm going to get my wish on that front. Still, from the content drops we've had this year, I do think 2025 is looking promising. There are still a lot of question marks, especially over the live service games, which are ready to go and definitely now feeling like they're from another CEO's tenure, you know, the likes of Marathon coming next year, and no one knows what the hell is happening with Fair Games. But between Death Stranding 2, which we're going to see more of at TGS, Ghost of Yotei, and, of course, Marvel's Wolverine, whenever that reappears, I do think, at least from a first-party perspective, it's going to be a better year than it has been across the past 12 months. But that is just my dumb opinion. I just wanted to get something out for you guys because I was genuinely so excited about the state of play, and I wanted to talk about these games, which is why you'll notice this has been a little bit rambly, and I don't have trusty Scott Tailford to bounce things off of, so you're getting a little bit of a stream of consciousness approach to this vid. But I hope you have enjoyed it. Let me know what you guys thought of the state of play down in the comments section below, and let's hope there are some more surprises in store for us at TGS. Until then, I've been Josh. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you soon.